Hey guys, in this video, I want to give you my exact auto detailing business structure, explain to you how I arrived at this particular business structure, and talk about why the way it's done by most people doesn't make any sense at all. Now make sure to go below in the YouTube description box and grab my free guide to starting your auto detailing business for under $500, where you're going to see a ton of time and effort that I've put into a document that lays out exactly what you need in order to start your detailing business without wasting time and money. Now many of you guys are wondering what kind of business structure I have and what do I mean by my detailing business structure versus the rest of the quote-unquote detailing business structures. So before we get into what mine is, I want to tell you what it is not and really relate it to what most people do when they think about starting an auto detailing business. Number one, many people think about auto detailing as a sort of hobby and they say, I'm really passionate about it, I love it, and therefore I'm going to start my business around it. And of course, this is a totally viable way to start a business and it absolutely makes sense. But what ends up happening oftentimes is that the passion for detailing gets stomped out of your business pretty quickly because the business aspect of detailing is not going so well for you. And it's really hard to love something when you're trying to do it for money and not making any money. And it's for that reason that I think this conversation is so essential to have, because most people don't talk about it. It's also the reason why I've developed an online course, what I would call a sort of auto detailing university online, where you not only learn exactly how to detail, but also how to wrap a business around it that maximizes profitability and maximizes the win-win situation for you and your customer and your business long term. Now, most people, when they start an auto detailing business, frame it up in their minds in a way that probably goes something like this. The more customers I can get, the better my business will do. And in many ways, their full effort is stuck on getting more customers, and it's really not their fault. This is the way that most detailers talk, it's the way most detailers think, and it's the way most detailing businesses are run. Now, obviously, the main problem with this is that the main problem detailers end up having is that they don't have enough customers. So it's ironic that the number one problem I hear on a daily basis from detailers is the very thing that they kind of base their business off of. And it's for that reason that I wonder why we haven't had any sort of new thought in the way a detailing business is run. If the number one problem is always, Luke, I don't have enough customers, then you'd think somewhere along the way, somebody would talk about how to structure a business in a way that's not always dependent on new customers. But unfortunately, common sense is not so common nowadays. We might call it uncommon sense. And that's why I talk about my particular business structure all the time nowadays, because I think it is the most viable way and the most reasonable way to approach an auto detailing business. So let's talk about a few things. Number one, if your auto detailing business is completely dependent on finding new customers, then you are completely dependent in putting a ton of time, a ton of energy, and inevitably money into what we call advertising to try to get new customers. This is also the most expensive way to run a business, simply because in any sort of business 101 class, they're going to tell you that it is always more expensive to go find a new customer than it is to do more business with a customer you already have. This is also something they teach you in a Logic 101 class. There's something called sunken cost fallacy, and what it means is the more time, energy, and money we put into something, the more probable it is that we're going to continue with that particular thing. This has a lot to do with why people continue to do business with people who they've done business with before. Now, of course, there's other things involved in this, something called the liking bias. People like to do business with people that they like. There's also something called the consistency and commitment bias, meaning when people do something, they tend to do it in a way that causes them to feel consistent with the decision they've already made. So when all of these things begin to work together in a customer and a sort of business relationship, you end up having a really high probability of forming what I would call a long-term relationship with a customer, and it actually makes the most sense, and that's why I say I think it's the most rational way to approach an auto detailing business. So while most people think about going and getting new customers, I actually think that just from a purely simple psychological perspective and how people's brains work, that actually doesn't make sense, and it's not the most rational way to approach a detailing business. The second thing is, if you approach a detailing business this way of always trying to get new customers and trying to develop some sort of system where you're getting a ton of customers or more than the competition, you end up having to essentially accommodate a large amount of people that If you were not approaching it this way, you wouldn't necessarily have to approach things in a negotiation sort of term or sense. What I mean is, if I'm seeing new people all the time, I'm consistently having to do things like, number one, sell myself, number two, get to know them, number three, talk to them in a way where they begin to build trust with me, number four, I have to adjust pricing structures to what they want at that particular time, and so on and so on. A new interaction with somebody always brings these new things. And it's once again for that reason that I think this is not the most rational way to approach a detailing business. It just doesn't make sense from, honestly, a purely mathematical point of view. If I can develop a system where I continue to do business with the same person over and over again, and I can build my list out of that type of person over and over again, rinsing and repeating this method, then essentially not only does my hourly rate skyrocket, as of course the detail becomes easier and easier, but there are sunken costs and hidden costs that most detailers don't talk about, and you're certainly not going to hear about them on social media because they're really not exciting. It's just like you're not going to hear about good things on the news because good news doesn't sell. Bad news gets clicks. And so while videos like these don't get the most clicks, they are once again what I would call the most rational way to approach a detailing business in the real world. So now that I've talked about what you don't want to do in that, essentially I've been saying approaching new customers all the time is not the most rational way to approach a detailing business. Of course, you've probably picked up on this, but the inverted or the opposite of that particular statement is what I would consider the best way to approach an auto detailing business. Meaning, if I don't want new customers all the time, what do I want? I want old customers. I want repeat customers. And essentially, I want what I call in my detailing world, maintenance customers. A maintenance customer is nothing more than a detail or a car that you do every week, month, bi-monthly, or just something on a regular basis. And while there are many reasons why I consider this the most rational way to approach detailing as a service-based business, I want to tell you how I got involved in this in the first place, because I spent a ton of time doing things the other way and what I would call the old way, and they really just didn't work. I actually started detailing when I was 13 years old. I asked my dad, "Hey Dad, how can I make money?" Don't ask me why a 13-year-old is asking a question like that, but for whatever reason, while some people tend towards basketball or baseball or dance or school, whatever it is, I always was super interested in business and how money operated and how money worked. So I said, "How can I make money?" And he said, "Well, my best friend in college made unbelievable amounts of money detailing cars, and so really you should talk to him." And so I talked to him over the phone a little bit. His name was Eddie, and I essentially concluded that detailing cars was something I could do today. It's something I could sell people on, and it's a way that I could learn how to operate a business and make some money. And so I started when I was 13 years old. Of course, my dad was gracious enough to buy a bucket, some Armor All, some soap, some Tire Shine, and pull out the old shop vac in the basement. Out of the basement, it was dusty, it was duct taped, the mouth of the hose was duct taped to the mouth of the vacuum itself, and it was pretty disgusting, but it worked for me. And when I started detailing, basically what we did was print off a bunch of business cards and flyers, and my dad explained to me, "Hey, you want to go door to door with these flyers, make sure you knock on the door, make sure you talk to the person face to face, because if you talk to them face to face, they're far more likely to do business with you than if you just leave flyers in the door. And then we're going to go through parking lots, and I want you to put business cards in the highest end, the nicest cars in the parking lots." Well, of course, that's not an advertising structure that's going to work today, and it's probably the least effective thing to do. But of course, a long time ago, many years ago, as a 13-year-old kid, that made a lot of sense, and it brought a lot of customers my way. So believe it or not, while a lot of people, if you're on this video and you're watching this video and you're thinking, "I don't know how I could possibly start a detailing business," maybe this will encourage you, because I started my detailing business pulling a radio flyer wagon around my neighborhood with my shop vac, my buckets, and my towels in the wagon while my friends were at the pool hollering at me and making fun of me in the summertime. So if you think you can't start a detailing business because you don't have a nice enough car or van or nice enough equipment, I promise you it's better than the old shop vac in the wagon. So if you're ahead of that, then you are already ahead of where I started, and you shouldn't be discouraged just because you don't have all of the right equipment. Now, after I finished handing out flyers, I waited a while, and while not a lot of calls came in, enough calls came in for me to get started. And essentially, once again, because I've got a great dad who encouraged me a lot, he would actually drive me and pick me up from my client's house because I could not drive myself because I was 13 years old. And what that did those coming years before I actually got a car and turned 16 and was able to build this business in a really real way is it put my reputation out there as a detailer, and it really taught me the nature of what detailing was. I also very, very quickly became familiar with the basic problems in the auto detailing world. One of those basic problems being, if I have to detail really dirty cars all the time, I am sinking a ton of time, energy, manpower, and really money into the jobs, and I'm really not making as much as I want to be making working the amount of that I'm working and putting in the manual labor that I'm putting in. And the basic problems of a detailing business became really clear really, really fast. So some years later, I turned 16, 17 years old, and I continued detailing. My detailing business grows. I pretty much become known as the guy around town who is the detailer. I buy a nicer vehicle to detail in, and I start targeting higher end clientele. Well, essentially, what had happened somewhere along the way is one or two people had said, hey, listen, will you come back on a regular basis? I'd like you to, quote unquote, maintain my vehicle. Where do you think I came up with the name maintenance client? And they wanted me to maintain their vehicle. Well, when I had tasted the glory of maintaining somebody's vehicle, I quickly realized the difference between my regular detailing of what I was doing and the what I would call maintenance detail. And because I like to approach things from a mathematical point of view because it's hard to argue with, let's just look at this on paper. What I realized about the maintenance detail is that number one, it was easy. And because it was easy, that meant it wasn't time consuming. I didn't sink a bunch of time. It wasn't energy draining. I didn't hurt my back. It wasn't difficult to accomplish. Thirdly, I didn't have to sink a bunch of product or tools in order to approach the detail and finish the detail. And fourthly, because I finished so quickly, the amount of money I made increased exponentially. Because while a maintenance detail, yes, I charged a little bit less than I would for a full-on trashed vehicle detail, I didn't charge so much less that it was a linear regression down. I just charged a little bit less for the maintenance detail. And so if we looked at it on paper, essentially, I sunk way less time, energy, product, and money into the detail, and yet made an extreme amount of more money than I would have ever made doing any other detail. So it's obvious why this idea became so appealing to me and why it started to really make sense. And it was about that time that I really started to question the way that I knew other detailers were building their businesses. Essentially, what I was so familiar with is detailers talking about wanting to be the biggest, wanting to have the most vans, wanting to have the most employees. And while for a time I was tempted to think that way, what I realized was I don't necessarily want to have 5 vans and 45 employees. I'm more interested in maximizing profitability in a way that's sustainable long term and allows me to potentially do what I want in the future. And that is the idea that ended up driving me into the maintenance detailing sort of idea. And after consulting what I would call mentors and people who knew more than I did, and even the same guy who got me into detailing, I learned about this idea of maintenance clients from a totally new lens, and I saw the detailing business from a totally new lens. And I decided that it was time to take this strategy and go all in with it simply because it made sense not only in my experience, but it also made sense on paper. And what happened in the years after that in targeting maintenance clients, meaning people who wanted their vehicle maintained and people who had very clean vehicles, oftentimes these are vehicles that aren't even and weren't even their daily drivers. What ended up happening is everything began to grow exponentially, and I don't just mean money, and it's very important to understand this. Detailing, while yes, it's an amazing business because you can create profitability today, you can do it with no sort of degree, there's very low barrier of entry. There are many unspoken truths about the detailing business that ended up working in my favor in a really big way that a lot of people don't talk about. And one of those things was the connections that I made. Connections as far as business connections with people who ended up helping me later on in my business and other businesses that are continuing to help me that I would not know and wouldn't have the connection if it weren't for my detailing business. And this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. But once again, there's a lot of unspoken truths about detailing that people will not talk about on social media because unfortunately, Lamborghinis and Ferraris are what sells, not necessarily this. So some years later, what ended up happening midway through college is that I had a list of maintenance clients that was between 300 and 500 people, and some of those maintenance clients were twice a year, but that 300 to 500 people list were people that I at minimum saw their cars twice a year. So while yes, I did have and do have a standard maintenance detail schedule, which generally falls maximum within 8 weeks of the last detail, there are specific situations of people who have multiple cars who are fairly high income, high net worth individuals. And those cars are not their daily drivers, and so they stay very clean year-round. And because of that, they ended up being great details once, twice, 3 times a year. And when you have a maintenance client list of 300 plus people, you have a business that is unbelievably sustainable long-term, and it also makes sense at every other level if you want to grow, meaning it's easier to train employees to deal with maintenance vehicles. It's easier to create margin and profitability with maintenance vehicles. It's easier to sustain long-term because it doesn't take incredible amounts of manual labor and physical labor. It's easier to create margin because you don't invest a ton of tools and products that other people must invest. And the list goes on and on and on. And that is my exact auto detailing business structure, and it's something that I teach in detail in the auto detailing online course that is about to come out in the next few weeks. So make sure that you go below in the YouTube description box and grab that free guide and join the Wilson Auto Detailing email list if you want to get notified about all of this and see how to start your detailing business for under $500. Once again, that free guide is below. Just join the email list and you will be sent that email to the email which you enter. Guys, as always, if you want to see any of the tools or products that I used in this video from this particular maintenance client, this interior of the Toyota Tacoma, go below and see the tools and products that I use for maintenance clients. There'll be Amazon links below if you want to check those out. And of course, if you're new to the Wilson Auto Detailing community and you haven't yet subscribed, but you like content like this, then hit the red subscribe button and tap the bell icon so that you get notified when I publish future videos, because I publish business content regarding auto detailing all the time. In fact, it's every other day. Guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, from Luke here at Wilson Auto Detailing, keep working hard, and I will see you guys in the next video.